She desegregated schools. My father was shot in the civil rights movement. Those people.
Let him finish.
I'm going to finish because you're being utterly disrespectful.
Not at all.
So I'm going to finish this comment. So what I'm telling you is that there are people in this country who fought, died, and bled for the right to vote. Don't be a dick. Just understand.
Okay. Bakari,
please.
I'm not a dick.
In today's discussion, things completely boil over on Newsnight with Abby Phillip when Bakari Sellers and Kevin O'Leary clash in a fiery exchange about voting rights, redistricting battles, and controversial Supreme Court rulings that many believe could reshape political power for black voters across the country. Kevin O'Leary attempts to justify the legal changes and defend the court's direction, but Bakari Sellers is clearly not backing down for a second. As the debate heats up, the conversation spirals into an intense back and forth over racial representation, political fairness, and what these decisions could mean for the future of democracy in America. The tension in the room becomes impossible to ignore as both men dig in, and by the end of it, viewers are left watching Bakari Sellers forcefully push back against O'Leary's arguments in one of the most explosive moments on CNN's Newsnight with Abby Phillip.
Over redistricting that is playing out at the Supreme Court as Republicans and Democrats try to gain an edge in November's midterm elections. Today, the court's conservative majority cleared the way for Alabama to use a new congressional map that would eliminate a district currently held by a black Democrat. The Supreme Court offered no explanation in its order, which tosses out a lower court decision that blocked the use of that 2023 map. There's already voting underway in that state. They are planning to toss out that map, go with a new map that favors Republicans, eliminates a district. And then you have the President Trump, sending a message to South Carolina, your home state, Bakari, saying the South Carolina State Senate has a big vote tomorrow on redistricting. He says, Republicans, be bold and courageous, just like the Republicans of the great state of Tennessee were last week. Move the U.S. House primaries to August. Leave the rest on the same schedule. Everything will be fine. Get it done. So
I want to take a step back and look at this from a 50,000-foot view, to be completely honest. I think Ashley and I have to wrestle with the fact that we are going to be the first generation to actually leave this country worse than the one that we inherited. There is a casual laughter from people we believe to be our friends on the right who are showing us true colors today because the most sacred, or one of the most sacred acts you have in the United States of America is the ability to cast a ballot and elect someone and send them to Congress, the State House, or a mayoral seat that represents your interest. And now black folks throughout the South are being silenced. And I don't find that to be a laughing matter.
I heard you say that people are losing representation. People are losing their voice. No voter has lost their voice at all. No one's been disenfranchised. Every voter in America before these court rulings could go cast a ballot this November, and every voter in America, white, black, or otherwise, can go cast a ballot right now. The lines may be changing, but every voter still has the same amount of voting power, one vote, that they had. It's just that this Supreme Court said your race doesn't necessarily have to dictate your political identity. The fact that you're an American citizen and your franchise gives you one vote, that is your political identity. And it is incumbent upon both parties, Republicans and Democrats, to run people who speak not to just one constituency, but all American interests. To me, that's how the November election should be run.
Please.
Go ahead, Ashley.
I might agree with you if they hadn't said something different 3 years ago. We aren't talking about in Alabama a district that existed when my grandmother was alive. We're talking about a district that was drawn in 2023 because there are injustices that are still being placed. We're talking about Memphis, where we're not it's not just one person across the street. They split a whole city into three to make black voters have less power in House maps. The Voting Rights Act, which actually was the last time it actually was reauthorized, was under your boss, George W. Bush.
A lot of people hear conversations about redistricting and immediately assume it is only about drawing different shapes on a political map. But the real issue runs much deeper than that. The bigger concern is whether entire communities still have a genuine chance to influence elections in a meaningful way. For years, voting rights experts and political analysts have warned that when densely populated minority neighborhoods are aggressively divided into several districts, it can dramatically weaken their collective political voice, even though every individual voter technically still keeps the right to cast a ballot. That distinction is exactly why these legal battles continue triggering outrage nationwide. The Voting Rights Act was never created solely to guarantee access to voting booths. It was also designed to stop systems that quietly diluted minority political power after generations of discrimination. That is why leaders from both political parties, including Republican administrations, repeatedly supported renewing those protections over the years. In fact, when the Voting Rights Act was reauthorized in 2006, the Senate passed it with an overwhelming 98-0 vote, because lawmakers across the political spectrum recognized that racial discrimination in voting had not simply vanished. Another major concern is the rise of intensely partisan district maps that create politically safe seats, where candidates no longer need to appeal to a broad range of voters. Election researchers have repeatedly found that extreme gerrymandering fuels political division because politicians are rewarded for energizing loyal supporters instead of building wider coalitions. As a result, many voters begin feeling politically ignored, even though they still participate in elections. The larger fear is not about one individual losing the ability to vote. It is about entire communities gradually. A lot of people hear conversations about redistricting and immediately assume it is only about drawing different shapes on a political map. But the real issue runs much deeper than that. The bigger concern is whether entire communities still have a genuine chance to influence elections in a meaningful way. For years, voting rights experts and political analysts have warned that when densely populated minority neighborhoods are aggressively divided into several districts, it can dramatically weaken their collective political voice, even though every individual voter technically still keeps the right to cast a ballot. That distinction is exactly why these legal battles continue triggering outrage nationwide. The Voting Rights Act was never created solely to guarantee access to voting booths. It was also designed to stop systems that quietly dilute.
It used to be a bipartisan thing. It used to be clear that the backdrop of this country, there is discrimination now. There was pervasive discrimination when the law was signed into law during the civil rights movement. We can all go into our partisan corners, but to act like what is happening right now is not a direct attack on Black voters' power, Black voters' ability to represent themselves. Now, we had this conversation yesterday, Scott. Black voters are allowed to elect whoever they want. And in 2024, they did. They elected a Black Democrat in that new district in Alabama. That Black Democrat went through a primary of 13 people, and Black voters found the agency to come and decide how that primary now will be erased. And put a Black Republican up in that district if you want Black voters to have a choice. But they're not. That's not what's happening. It is a dissemination of distribution of Black power. And to call it anything other than that, I just think is being historically ignoring the past of our country and pretending like we're not trying to drive our country to a different type of future.
One of the interesting things about Tennessee that we should also keep in mind is that Tennessee district that they did away with existed prior to the Voting Rights Act. So Memphis, as a city, has been a district even before they were trying to rectify racial discrimination with the Voting Rights Act. So, we're going to start to see maybe Virginia might try again and create that. Maybe they might try to create an 11-0 map, because now, according to the Supreme Court, you can. We might live in a country where all around the country we have states where the minority political party has effectively zero representation in Congress.
I think everybody should take confidence in the fact the Supreme Court basically supported one vote, one person, guaranteed in perpetuity. And the rest is just map wars. And I think we should get used to it. And I think it's, as you said, a state-based situation. Add this to the mix. At the end of the day, the state decides at the state level. It's in the Constitution. Get over it.
So the problem with that sentiment is that you were born in 1954.
Yeah.
Okay. You're
Very popular.
You're 71.
Yeah.
Right. In 1954.
By the way, I'm a vampire. I'm never gonna die,
during your lifetime, we've actually had Brown v. Board of Education.
I remember.
Yeah, Brown v. Board of Education. I don't know how you remember it. I think you were like 2 months old. But I'm not finished yet. Let me finish my thought.
Drill back to 54.
Yeah, because you're still alive, right? And so there's an entire generation of people Brown v. Board, it overturned Plessy v. Ferguson
And
of
your point
1896.
is? Bring it.
My point is that my mother was born in 1951. She desegregated schools. My father was shot in the civil rights movement. Those people.
Let him finish.
I'm going to finish because you're being utterly disrespectful.
Not at all.
So I'm going to finish this
Just let him
comment.
finish.
So what I'm telling you is that there are people in this country who fought, died, and bled for the right to vote. Don't be a dick. Just understand.
Okay. Bakari,
just
please.
just
I'm not a dick.
understand.
What makes this debate so emotionally charged is that it touches one of the most sensitive fault lines in American politics, which is whether political representation is genuinely being protected or intentionally weakened through redistricting strategies. Some people try to frame these court decisions as straightforward constitutional questions, but historians and voting rights scholars have spent years pointing out that district lines have often been manipulated as political weapons to reduce the influence of minority communities without outright denying anyone the right to vote. That history is exactly why the Voting Rights Act received such massive bipartisan support for decades. Lawmakers understood that discrimination could evolve beyond old tactics like literacy tests or poll taxes, and instead appear through methods like cracking and packing districts to weaken certain voting blocks. Courts have repeatedly acknowledged that even when every citizen technically casts a vote, the way districts are structured can still determine whether specific communities have any real influence in Congress. There was also growing evidence that highly partisan maps contribute to political extremism because they create safe districts where candidates only need to satisfy their own political base instead of appealing to broader groups of voters. Election experts have warned that this weakens competitive races and fuels public distrust in democratic institutions overall. Another layer people often overlook is the emotional and generational history tied to these conversations. Many families still carry living memories of segregation, voter intimidation, and violence connected to the civil rights movement. For those communities, arguments...
The Constitution is being upheld.
Hey,
Do you have a problem with that? Do you have a problem with the Constitution of the United States of America?
Bakari, I'm going to stop you because I just want everybody to reset with a modicum of respect at this table. Please stop.
I want you to understand
That's
that there is
Mr.
a price.
Get to you, by
there
the
is a price that was paid for this right. There is a price that we uphold, and whether or not
Where are
you
you going
value
with
that,
this?
whether or not you value that or not, there are people who bled, sweat, and died, and were imprisoned for access to the ballot box. And what we're
They still
seeing
have access.
what we're seeing throughout the South is that their voice, their vote, their representation, and people who have lived experiences to represent them are not being sent to Congress or where they need to go.
This debate, by the way, is happening among the justices. If you look at the Louisiana decision, the conservatives are saying, we've made great progress. It's time to let go of this, of using racial discrimination.
And that's why I utilize the description of
and the liberal justices say exactly what you just said, Bakari, which is there's a history here that we're overlooking.
But Ellie, I mean, the 3 years have passed since 2023 and 2026.
Exactly.
So
It's not that
All
long.
of a sudden, the country has made that
much progress?
in 3 years.
That's the criticism of the majority. Look, there's a famous quote by Ruth Bader Ginsburg, right? When the Voting Rights Act came.
Who should have retired?
When the Voting Rights Act came up, when she was on the bench, she said, the conservatives said, well, we've made great progress, so we don't need this anymore. She said, I'm paraphrasing, but she said, that's like getting rid of your umbrella in a rainstorm because you're not getting wet.
Yes.
And the question is it still raining? Is it drizzling? Is it clear? People differ strongly on that.
And guess what? It can be clear one day and rain the next. And so that's the inconsistency.
And the crazy part is, go ahead.
I just want to point out the one person, one vote. I think, Bakari, us millennials will have to wrestle with how we're going to leave this earth, and I'm determined to leave it better than I found it. And I think that this decision is actually going to open a rush to reevaluate a lot of things, like you say, are in the Constitution. Because right now you have a hat on that says Utah, and they have more representation in the Senate than the people actually in Alabama have in the Senate.
I got a situation in Utah going on.
I know, that's not why you have the hat on.
No, I have
but
it on.
You have it on, and so there are states right now that have
supporting
two
the people of
senators.
Utah.
When we're sitting in a state right now that has more population than Utah multiplied by 10. And so if we really want to talk about...
I love Utah.
I'm talking about all the states that have smaller populations. If we really want to talk about one person, one vote, and if we really want to go down a path to see what real franchise means, you might have just opened a discussion that this country should be is timely to actually have.
What makes this conversation so significant is that it exposes the huge difference between technically having the right to vote and actually having meaningful political representation that carries real influence. Throughout American history, courts have repeatedly recognized that voter suppression does not always look like people being directly blocked from casting ballots. In many cases, it can happen through district maps carefully designed to weaken the collective voting power of certain communities, especially minority populations concentrated in major southern cities. That reality is one of the main reasons the Voting Rights Act earned such historic bipartisan backing for so many years. Lawmakers understood that discrimination could evolve into more subtle systems that still reduced representation without openly violating someone's ability to vote. Election experts have argued for decades that heavily manipulated district maps can create political outcomes where millions of voters feel practically invisible, even while actively participating in elections. Beneath all of this is also a much larger constitutional debate happening across the country. Political scientists and legal scholars continue questioning whether institutions like the Senate and the Electoral College already create uneven representation between states with vastly different population sizes. Smaller states often hold influence that far outweighs their population numbers compared to heavily populated states, which makes conversations about one person, one vote far more complicated when viewed nationally instead of district by district. Another important reality is that representation directly shapes real-world policy decisions that affect everyday life. Research has shown that communities with weakened political influence often struggle to receive equal attention when it comes to education funding, healthcare access, infrastructure improvements, and criminal justice reform. That is why, for many Americans, these arguments are not just abstract legal disputes happening in courtrooms. They directly affect whether entire communities feel heard, respected, and represented in Washington.